Chapter 1. The House That Offered Everything. In the far country beyond the last dependable road, where the hills held their breath under winter cloud and the forests stood like dark velvet curtains against the sky, there was a house that did not belong to any village. It belonged to itself. Travelers spoke of it in halves and fragments, never with full certainty. Some claimed it was a manor, others a chateau, others a simple estate made strange only by the way it seemed to appear in different places depending on who was looking. People agreed on the one detail that mattered. It was old, beautiful, and quietly impossible to ignore once you had heard of it. They also agreed on the man who lived there. They called him Bluebeard. It was not a name he was born with. It was the name the world offered him when it did not understand what it saw. His beard was not truly blue, not in the way a ribbon or a flower might be blue. It was dark, so dark it held a cool sheen, the kind you see on midnight feathers or deep water. In certain light it seemed almost indigo, and the rumor did the rest. Bluebeard, people said, was rich. That was the first hook of the story, the part that turned heads at market stalls and made lips part in the warm corners of bakeries. Rich meant safe, to some. Rich meant powerful, to others. Rich meant you could stop worrying about bread and winter coal and the thinness of your blankets. And Bluebeard's house, whatever it truly was, looked like the kind of place where winter could never enter without invitation. The second hook was simpler. Bluebeard wanted to marry. That was the part that made voices lower. Not because there was anything scandalous about a man seeking a wife, but because the town's imagination had already painted him as something other. Men like him, people believed, did not ask. They acquired. They did not court. They selected. And yet, in the towns and small villages nearest the hills, messengers came with polite letters sealed in dark wax. And in those letters was always the same gentle proposition. A visit, a dinner, a conversation, a chance. It sounded civilized. It sounded safe. That was what made it dangerous in the particular way that quiet things can be. On the edge of one such village lived a young woman named Eloan. She had no title, no inheritance worth mentioning. Her father kept accounts for a cooper, and her mother made bread that people praised with the kind of compliments that meant they wanted more. Eloan herself was known for being calm, for moving through the world as though she had learned early that panic did not change outcomes. She was not especially talkative, though she was not shy either. She listened with a focus that made others feel briefly seen, and she spoke only when she had something to place carefully into the space between people. Eloan had grown up among women who measured their lives in duties. Who would marry? Who would leave? Who would remain? Who would become someone else's household before winter came again? She had watched girls her age be praised for softness, for sweetness, for being easy to shape. She had watched others be warned for sharpness, for asking questions too directly, for refusing to smooth their own edges. Eloan had learned something private and useful, that people often feared questions not because the questions were rude, but because answers were expensive. So when Bluebeard's letter arrived, addressed to her family, written with a steady hand, phrased as an invitation rather than a command, Eloan read it twice before anyone else noticed she had gone quiet. Her mother's hands trembled slightly when she held the paper. Her father cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. "Of all the girls," her mother whispered, half astonished, half frightened. "Why you?" Eloan folded the letter neatly. "Because I'm not loud about wanting," she said. Her father frowned. "That is not a reason." "It's the best reason," Eloan replied gently. In the days that followed, the village began to look at her differently. Not cruelly, curiously, as though she had already stepped into a story that would belong to everyone once enough time had passed. The neighbors offered advice disguised as concern. "Remember your manners. Remember your gratitude. Remember that some opportunities do not come twice." Eloan thanked them all. she kept her thoughts to herself. On the morning of the visit, the sky was a smooth slate gray. Frost glimmered along the edges of roofs, and the road out of the village looked narrower than it ever had. A carriage arrived, black, polished, quiet. The driver did not speak unless spoken to. He opened the door with practiced ease, as if he had done this for many women before. Eloan climbed in without hesitation. Her mother pressed a small cloth bundle into her lap at the last moment. Bread, dried fruit, a charm stitched into the corner. Eloan held it for a moment, then tucked it beside her. The carriage rolled away. The village receded. The hills rose. As they traveled, Eloan watched the landscape change. The trees grew taller, their branches bare and dark against the pale sky. The air felt colder, cleaner. The silence outside the carriage did not feel empty. It felt attentive. After an hour, the driver spoke for the first time, his voice low. Nearly there. Eloan looked out and saw, through the trees, the first glimpse of the house. It was larger than she expected, not towering, not ostentatious, but undeniably vast, as though it had been built to hold more than furniture and rooms. Stone walls rose in clean lines, softened by age. Windows glowed faintly with candlelight. A long drive curved toward heavy gates that stood open, welcoming without warmth. The house did not look haunted. It looked cared for. That, Eloan realized, was what made her grip tighten on her bundle. Because neglect was easy to judge. Attention was harder. The carriage pulled up before a broad set of steps. Bluebeard stood at the top, waiting. He was taller than most men in her village, dressed in dark clothing that looked expensive not because it glittered, but because it fit him perfectly. His beard was, indeed, dark enough to appear blue in the winter light. His face was calm, his posture unhurried. He did not smile widely. He did not attempt charm. Instead, he inclined his head as if greeting an equal. Eloan, he said, pronouncing her name as though he had learned it carefully. She stepped out and looked up at him. Sir. No, he said gently. Not, sir. Today you are a guest. Eloan paused. What should I call you then? Bluebeard will do, he replied, as if resigned to the name but not offended by it. He offered his hand. Eloan took it. His hand was warm. Not clammy, not cold. Warm, like someone who lived in rooms with fires and thick curtains. He led her inside. The house smelled of wax and cedar and something faintly herbal, like dried rosemary crushed between fingers. The entry hall was wide, its stone floors covered by heavy rugs. Candles burned in tall holders, their flames steady, not flickering. Servants moved quietly, almost silently, their eyes downcast but not fearful. They seemed practiced in stillness. Bluebeard guided her through rooms that felt designed to impress gently rather than overwhelm. A sitting room with deep chairs and bookshelves, a dining hall with a table set for two, a conservatory where winter light filtered through glass over sleeping plants. Everything was clean. Everything was arranged. It was the kind of house that promised it would take care of you, if you allowed it. Bluebeard spoke as they walked, his voice even and calm. I know what people say, he said. Eloan kept her gaze forward. Do you? Yes. And does it bother you? He paused before answering. It would if I expected the world to be fair. Eloan glanced at him then, assessing. Do you? No, he replied simply. They reached the dining hall. A fire burned low in the hearth. Food was already prepared, soup, bread, roasted vegetables, a small dish of preserved berries. Nothing extravagant, nothing sharp. It was considerate. Bluebeard pulled out her chair. Eloan sat. He sat across from her, folding his hands lightly on the table. You may ask what you like, he said, as though offering a gift. Eloan did not respond immediately. She had been raised among people who asked questions only when they were certain the answers would not harm them. But Eloan had never been satisfied with safe questions. So she began with something quiet. "Why do you want a wife?" she asked. Bluebeard's eyes remained steady. "Because a house like this becomes strange when lived in alone," he said. "Because silence thickens in the corners. Because a life without witness becomes distorted." Eloan absorbed this. "Do you want love?" she asked, her voice soft. Bluebeard's gaze did not flicker. "I want peace," he said, "and I am willing to build it with someone who can live without pretending." Eloan felt the words settle inside her. Peace was an unusual thing for a man like him to offer. It sounded honest. It sounded, again, safe in a way that made her wary. "And what do you offer?" she asked. "Besides comfort." Bluebeard leaned back slightly. "Freedom," he said. Eloan's eyebrows lifted faintly. "Freedom," he repeated as though he expected disbelief. "To read what you wish. To walk the grounds. To have rooms that are yours. To speak without being corrected for being too much or too little." Eloan studied him. "And in return?" Bluebeard's voice lowered. "A promise." Eloan held still. "What kind?" He reached into his pocket and produced a ring of keys, not many, but enough to suggest the size of the house. The metal glinted softly in the candlelight. "These keys," he said, placing them gently on the table, "open the house." Eloan did not touch them. "All of it?" she asked. "Almost," he replied, and there it was, the first crack in his smooth offering. Not a threat. Not a warning. Simply the shape of a boundary. Eloan's gaze sharpened. "One door," Bluebeard said calmly. "One room. It is mine alone." He let the words rest between them, not dramatic, not theatrical. He spoke as if discussing property lines rather than something darker. "You may have everything else," he continued. "Every corridor, every chamber, every garden path. But that one door remains closed." Eloan's heartbeat did not quicken. Not yet. She simply asked as gently as she could, "Why?" Bluebeard met her gaze without flinching. "Because everyone needs a place the world does not enter," he said. "Even a wife does not deserve every corner of a man." Eloan considered this carefully. It was reasonable. It sounded like privacy. It sounded like dignity. And yet, the house was so quiet, so attentive, so carefully arranged around comfort, that the idea of a forbidden room felt like a deliberate note in an otherwise soothing song. It made her mind lean toward it, if only slightly. Bluebeard watched her. He did not smile. He did not push. He simply waited to see if her eyes would flick to the keys. Eloan kept her gaze on his face. "I understand," she said. Bluebeard's shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. The servants began to clear the table with silent efficiency. Bluebeard stood and gestured toward a corridor. "Your room is prepared," he said. "You may rest, or wander, or sit by the fire. Tonight, you are asked for nothing." Eloan rose and followed him down the hall. The carpets muffled their steps. The candles cast steady light. The house seemed to lean around her, offering warmth without insisting she accept it. When they reached her chamber, Bluebeard opened the door and stepped aside. It was beautiful. A large bed with heavy blankets, a small table with books, a window overlooking the gardens dusted in frost. "A key will open this," he said, placing one of the keys in her hand. "And many others." Eloan looked down at the cold metal against her palm. "And the one it won't?" she asked softly. Bluebeard's gaze remained calm. "You have promised," he said, not as a threat, but as a quiet expectation. "And I am a man who lives by promises." Eloan nodded once. Bluebeard turned to leave. At the threshold he paused. "Eloan." She looked up. "If you choose to stay," he said, voice low. "This house will give you everything you ever wished for." Eloin held his gaze. "And what does it take?" she asked. Bluebeard's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with something older. "Only that you do not insist on what is not offered," he said. "Only that you let one door remain closed." He left her alone. The door clicked shut. Eloin stood in the center of the room, the key ring resting heavy in her hand like a question she had not yet asked. Outside, winter pressed gently against the glass. Inside, the house waited, and somewhere, in the deeper corridors beyond her sight, a door sat in darkness, not locked against force, but protected by something far quieter: the expectation of obedience. Eloin sat on the edge of the bed and turned the keys slowly in her fingers. Not because she intended to break her promise, because she could already feel how the house was designed. It offered everything, so that one thing would become unbearable. And she understood, with sudden clarity, that this was not simply a home. It was a test built out of comfort, a story built out of silence. And the first chapter had only just taught her what the house truly wanted. Not love, not gratitude, not even loyalty. It wanted her attention. And attention, Eloin knew, was the most expensive thing a person could give away without realizing it. Chapter 2. The key that was given like kindness. Eloin slept more deeply than she expected. It wasn't because she felt safe, exactly. Safety was a complicated word in a house where everything was prepared before you asked for it. But her body, worn down by village winters and thin walls and the constant quiet strain of being observed by neighbors who believed their opinions were a kind of weather, accepted the warmth without argument. The bed was heavy with thick blankets. The air carried the soft scent of cedar and clean linen. There were no drafts, no rattling shutters, no distant arguments through walls. And still, in the middle of the night, Eloin woke. Not in panic, in awareness. The house was silent, but it was not the same silence she knew from home, the silence of night settling naturally over a place. This silence felt arranged, like the final detail in a carefully made room. Eloin lay still, eyes open in the dark. She listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No whispering voices. No wind pushing at eaves. Just presence. As though the house itself were waiting for her to move. She turned her head slightly and saw the keys on the small table beside the bed, catching the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Cold metal. Bright possibility. She did not reach for them. Instead, she closed her eyes again, and when sleep returned, it came with a dream that felt more like a memory she hadn't lived yet. A corridor. A door. A hand holding a key. And behind the door, nothing she could name, only a pressure, a sense of knowledge pressing outward as if it wished to be let in. When she woke again, morning had arrived quietly. A tray had been left outside her door. Tea, bread, a small dish of honey, a folded note written in the same neat hand as the invitation. "You are welcome to the house today. Take your time." There was no demand, no schedule, no instruction disguised as kindness. Eloin ate slowly, watching the frost sparkle on the garden outside her window. She tried to remember the last time someone had offered her time without expecting she would spend it proving something. She dressed in a simple gown that had been laid out for her, her size, her taste, as if someone had studied her quietly. She did not like that thought, and yet she couldn't deny the small comfort of not having to fight with stiff fabric or loose seams. When she stepped into the corridor, the house greeted her with softness. Carpet swallowed her footsteps. Curtains held the light gently. The air was warmer than it should have been for winter, as if the manor refused to acknowledge the season's harshness. A servant passed, bowed slightly, and moved on without meeting her eyes. Eloin felt a strange sensation then. Not power, not authority, but a kind of invisibility that came with being treated like something delicate and important at the same time. She wondered. At first, she walked with the careful caution of a guest, staying near rooms she had already been shown, touching nothing, listening for signs of displeasure. But the house offered no resistance. Doors opened easily. Corridors led to more corridors. Every turn revealed another room, another space designed to please. A library with shelves so full they looked like walls. A music room with instruments resting untouched, as if waiting for hands that would play without being judged. A breakfast parlor with windows that looked out onto a frozen pond where swans drifted like pale ghosts of summer. It was beautiful. It was almost too beautiful. A place like this did not merely shelter a person. It shaped them. It encouraged softness, compliance, gratitude. It offered comfort in exchange for a quieter spirit, a smaller appetite for change. Eloan paused at a painting in a long hallway. It showed Bluebeard standing near the same pond she had seen through the breakfast parlor window, his coat dark, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the manor rose like a careful promise. The painter had captured his beard exactly as rumor described, so dark it seemed blue in the light. Eloan studied the brushwork, the careful shading. She searched for warmth in the eyes, for humor, for cruelty. She found neither, only stillness. "Do you like it?" a voice asked. Eloan turned. Bluebeard stood a short distance away, holding a small book in his hands. His steps were silent, practiced, as though he had learned to move through his own house without disturbing it. "It's accurate," Eloan said. Bluebeard's mouth curved faintly. "That's not always the same as flattering." Eloan met his gaze. "Would you prefer flattering?" "No," he said simply. "I prefer true." Eloan felt the word settle into her chest. People used that word the way they used God's name, to justify whatever they wanted. Bluebeard used it like a boundary. "I hope the house suits you," he said. "It's generous," Eloan replied. Bluebeard nodded as if that was exactly what he intended. "It has been quiet too long," he said. "A house grows strange without someone new to breathe inside it." Eloan watched him carefully. "Do you spend much time alone?" Bluebeard's gaze flicked briefly toward a corridor that led deeper into the manor, then returned to her. "Yes," he said. "And no." Eloan waited. He did not elaborate. Instead, he held out the book he carried. "For you," he said. Eloan accepted it. The leather cover was smooth and worn, the pages clean. "What is it?" she asked. "A collection of tales," Bluebeard replied. "Stories people tell when they want to soften something sharp." Eloan opened the book and skimmed the first lines. They were old folk tales, the kind her mother used to half recite while kneading dough, cautionary, strange, full of quiet punishments for those who asked the wrong questions. "You enjoy these?" Eloan asked. Bluebeard's expression did not change. "I study them," he said. "They reveal what people fear." Eloan looked up from the book. "And what do people fear most?" Bluebeard answered without pause. "Being seen where they did not mean to be seen." Eloan felt the hairs along her arms lift slightly. It was not the statement itself, but how calmly he spoke it, as though he had lived a long time with that truth. Bluebeard turned to leave, then paused. "If you wish," he said, "you may entertain yourself today. Write if you like. Walk the grounds. Choose any room to sit in." Eloan's fingers tightened around the book. "Any room," she echoed softly. Bluebeard's gaze held hers. "Any but one." There it was again, the single deliberate note in an otherwise soothing song. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. But the boundary stood like a candle flame in a dark room, impossible to ignore once you knew it existed. Eloan nodded. "I remember." Bluebeard inclined his head. "Good. he said quietly. Then we will have peace. When he walked away, Eloin stood still for a long moment. He offered it the way others offered marriage, as if it were a bargain, a structure, a thing that could be built if both parties agreed to the terms. Eloin wandered again, but her attention shifted. She found herself noticing doors she had not noticed before. Not because they were labeled or locked or guarded, because the house held them differently. Most doors in the manor opened with quiet ease, the hinges oiled, the wood smooth beneath her fingers. But occasionally, she would pass a door that felt heavier, not physically, but in the way the corridor around it seemed to narrow slightly, as if discouraging lingering. Eloin stopped at one such door. It was plain, dark wood, with no decoration. A simple handle. No lock visible. It looked like nothing. That was what made it stand out. The keys in her pocket shifted slightly as she breathed. Eloin did not touch the door. She did not need to. The house was already doing the work of drawing her mind toward it. She turned away and continued down the corridor, forcing her focus onto something else. A window, a tapestry, the soft light that pooled on the carpet like spilled milk. But her thoughts did not obey as easily as her feet. That evening, Bluebeard invited her to dine again. The meal was warm and careful. The thick stew, bread, mulled fruit. The table was set for two, as before, with no extra place settings, no crowd of servants hovering. Bluebeard spoke sparingly. He asked about her village, her childhood, her habits. The questions were polite, almost gentle, but Eloin sensed how they formed a shape around her, learning her. When she asked a question in return, he answered cleanly, never too long, never too revealing. "What do you do all day?" Eloin asked softly. Bluebeard's spoon paused. "I manage the estate," he said. "I read. I walk." "And the forbidden room?" she asked, her voice calm. Bluebeard's eyes lifted slowly. Eloin felt the moment tighten. He did not scold her. He did not look angry. He looked attentive. "Asking about it is not forbidden," he said. "Only entering." Eloin nodded. "Then I'll ask again. Why does it matter so much?" Bluebeard set his spoon down with deliberate care. "Because," he said quietly, "people confuse access with love." Eloin's breath caught slightly, though she kept her expression steady. Bluebeard continued. "They believe if they can reach every part of you, they own you. And if they cannot, they are offended. I will not live that way." Eloin studied him. It was a reasonable argument. It was also a very practiced one. "And if I promised to respect it," she asked, "would you trust me?" Bluebeard's gaze did not waver. "Trust is not a gift," he said. "It's a habit, built slowly." Eloin felt the weight of the keys in her pocket. A habit, a test built out of comfort. After dinner, Bluebeard rose. "You may retire whenever you like," he said. Eloin stood as well. "Do you ever feel lonely here?" she asked, her voice softer now. Bluebeard paused at the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame. "Yes," he said simply. Eloin waited for more. Bluebeard looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something faint behind his composure. Not tenderness, not warmth, but fatigue. "And still," he added, "loneliness is preferable to chaos." He left. Eloin returned to her room and closed the door gently behind her. She sat at the table and placed the keys in front of her. They lay there like a small constellation of choices. Most of them were ordinary, practical, harmless. One of them, she did not know which, was a boundary made physical. Eloin stared at the ring, her fingers hovering just above it. She did not want to break her promise. Not because she feared Bluebeard's anger. Because she understood the deeper danger. The way a house like this could turn curiosity into compulsion, making the forbidden door feel like the only honest thing in the entire manor. Outside her window, winter wind brushed the branches softly. Inside, the manor remained warm. Too warm. Too quiet. Eloan lifted the keys and turned them slowly, listening to the small metallic chime they made. It sounded almost like a lullaby. And she realized, with a calm clarity that chilled her more than the winter outside, that Bluebeard had not given her the keys because he trusted her. He had given them to her because he wanted to find out what kind of woman she was. Not whether she would obey, but whether she would insist on knowing. And in a house built on comfort, insistence was the sharpest thing a person could carry. Chapter 3. The Door That Learned Her Name. The house adjusted to Eloan. Not in any way that could be pointed to or proven, but in the subtle manner of places that have existed long enough to recognize patterns. The air seemed to warm more quickly in rooms where she lingered. Lamps were always lit just ahead of her path. Chairs appeared where she found herself slowing, as if the house anticipated the need to rest before she acknowledged it. Comfort, Eloan understood, was not neutral. It was persuasive. Days passed without clear edges. Morning blended into afternoon, afternoon into evening, all of it softened by routine that required nothing of her beyond presence. Meals appeared. Fires were tended. The servants remained efficient and quiet, careful never to intrude, careful never to invite conversation. Eloan wandered, read, sat by windows and watched frost creep along glass. She explored the gardens wrapped in a thick cloak, her breath clouding the cold air as she traced paths that curved back toward the house no matter which direction she took. The manor was vast, but it was also deliberate. You could walk for hours and still feel gently guided. Bluebeard joined her often, but never too closely. He did not hover. He did not interrogate. When he spoke, it was with the calm assurance of someone accustomed to being obeyed without asking for it. He showed her the stables, the outer buildings, the winter cellars stocked deep enough to survive years of scarcity. He spoke of harvests, of maintenance, of the quiet labor required to keep such a place alive. This house rewards consistency, he told her once, as they stood near a window overlooking the frozen pond. It dislikes chaos. Eloan watched the ice shimmer faintly beneath the pale light. Deep? She asked. Bluebeard smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Chaos wastes attention, he said, and attention is finite. The word struck her, attention, spoken again, as it had been before. Eloan began to notice how often he returned to it. Attention as currency. Attention as danger. Attention as something to be controlled. At night, alone in her room, Eloan found herself listening more closely to the house. It had a sound, though a quiet one. A low settling of stone, the distant sigh of pipes, the whisper of wind threading through places she could not see. Sometimes she imagined footsteps where there were none. Sometimes she imagined doors breathing softly, wood expanding and contracting with temperature and time. She dreamed again of corridors. But now the dream changed. In it she walked freely through the manor, keys jangling lightly in her hand. Every door opened easily at her touch, revealing rooms filled with ordinary things, books, linens, furniture covered in sheets, until she reached the last corridor. In the dream, it was always narrower than she remembered, the walls pressing closer, the light dimmer. The door at the end was plain and dark, just as she had seen in waking hours. But now, in the dream, the handle was warm, not cold metal. She would reach for it, and wake before her fingers closed. Each time, her heart beat steadily, not with fear but with an uncomfortable sense of familiarity, as though the door were learning her. On the fourth morning, Bluebeard placed the full ring of keys into her hand. Not ceremoniously, not as a test announced aloud, simply as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You should have them," he said. "You are here long enough now that borrowing them feels unnecessary." Eloan's fingers closed around the metal. "You trust me?" she asked. Bluebeard considered her for a moment, his gaze calm, unreadable. "I trust the structure," he said. "People reveal themselves within it." Elowen nodded, though the answer unsettled her more than a refusal would have. That day, she explored with the keys in her pocket. Doors opened smoothly, their locks well cared for. Each room revealed something of Bluebeard's life, not intimate, not personal, but curated. Books chosen carefully. Furniture arranged with intention. Nothing out of place. Nothing impulsive. It was a house designed to leave no loose ends. And yet, the more she moved through it, the more Elowen felt the absence of disorder pressing against her thoughts. Nothing had been left accidentally. Nothing forgotten. Nothing ignored. The forbidden door announced itself without sound. Elowen realized she was standing before it only after she had already stopped walking. The corridor around it felt different. Not colder, not darker, but subtly resistant. As if the space itself preferred she keep moving. The air felt thicker, the silence heavier. The door was exactly as she remembered. Plain wood, no ornamentation, no visible lock, no sign of importance. It could have been a pantry. It could have been a storage room. That was the cleverness of it. Elowen stood still, keys heavy in her pocket. She did not reach for them. She studied the door instead, the grain of the wood, the way the handle curved slightly inward, shaped by countless hands over time. The door did not look neglected. It looked used. That unsettled her. She stepped closer. The house did not protest. Her heart did not race. She felt, instead, a quiet clarity. This door did not exist to be guarded. It existed to be resisted. It was a measure, not of obedience, but of endurance. How long could someone live comfortably while knowing there was a place they were not meant to see? Elowen turned away. The house seemed to exhale. That evening at dinner, Bluebeard watched her more closely than usual. "You are settling in," he said. "Yes," Elowen replied. "And the house suits you." "It does." His gaze lingered. "You've been exploring." "Yes." "Thoroughly." Elowen met his eyes. Enough to understand it's designed to be understood slowly. Bluebeard's lips curved faintly. "Good." He lifted his glass. Curiosity, when paced correctly, becomes wisdom. Elowen sipped her drink, letting the warmth settle. "And when it isn't?" she asked quietly. Bluebeard set his glass down. "Then it becomes intrusion." Silence stretched between them, not tense, but deliberate. That night, Elowen returned to her room with the keys still in her pocket. She removed them and placed them on the table. They made a soft sound, too soft to be accidental. She stared at them for a long time. The forbidden key did not look different from the others. That was the cruelest part. She could pick it up without anyone knowing. The house would not cry out. The servants would not appear. Bluebeard would not burst through the door. The only witness would be herself. Elowen lay awake late into the night, listening to the house breathe. She realized something then, something small and sharp. Bluebeard did not fear her disobedience. He feared her certainty. The door was not there to punish curiosity. It was there to teach her where the house believed her limits should be. And as Elowen drifted towards sleep, the dream returned. The corridor, the narrowing walls, the warmth of the handle beneath her fingers. Only this time, just before she woke, she heard something new. Not a voice. A whisper of expectation, carried through the wood and stone of the manor itself. So, the door had learned her name. And it was waiting. Chapter 4. The Comfort That Tightened. After the keys were given, the house grew kinder. That was how it felt at first. Meals arrived with greater attention to Elowen's tastes. Less salt, more warmth, bread baked darker at the edges the way she liked it. The fires were lit earlier in the evening. The servants anticipated her presence with uncanny accuracy, stepping aside just before she entered a room, placing chairs where she might pause. Nothing was asked of her. Nothing was demanded. And that, Eloan realized, was the slowest way to be claimed. Bluebeard did not mention the door again. Instead, he spoke of the future. Not in sweeping declarations, not in romantic certainty, but in practical considerations. Repairs that would need tending in spring. Books he thought she might enjoy. A garden wall that could be reshaped if she preferred a different view. He spoke as though her presence were already permanent. As though the question had been settled quietly while she slept. Eloan listened with the same attentiveness she had always carried, but now she noticed something beneath his words, a subtle narrowing of possibility. Each suggestion was reasonable, each plan sensible, and each one assumed she would remain. "Do you ever leave the house?" she asked one afternoon as they walked beneath the covered gallery overlooking the gardens. Bluebeard paused, resting his hand lightly against the stone rail. "Rarely," he said. "Everything I require comes to me." "And what about what you don't require?" Eloan asked. Bluebeard smiled faintly. "Those things tend to complicate life." Eloan thought of her village, of cold mornings and loud markets and the way people talked too much because silence made them uneasy. She thought of how narrow her choices had felt there. The manner was different. Here, her days were wide open. And yet, slowly she noticed how often she chose the same rooms, the same corridors, the same window at dusk. Comfort, she realized, was not the absence of constraint. It was the careful removal of alternatives. At night, the dreams changed again. The corridor grew longer, the walls closer. The door at the end no longer waited in darkness. Light spilled faintly from beneath it, warm and steady, as though the room beyond were alive and breathing. In the dream, Eloan did not feel fear. She felt invitation. She woke each time with her hands clenched, nails pressed into her palms. The house greeted her mornings with silence that felt increasingly expectant. On the seventh day, Bluebeard invited her to walk beyond the inner grounds. They passed through a gate Eloan had not noticed before, iron, heavy, opened easily by Bluebeard's hand. Beyond it, the land sloped downward into a stand of winter trees, their branches bare and interwoven like a lattice against the sky. "This path leads to the old boundary," Bluebeard said. "Few people go there now." "Why?" Eloan asked. "Because it serves no purpose," he replied. They walked for some time, their steps quiet on frost-hardened earth. The further they went, the less the house seemed to press against Eloan's thoughts. Her breathing eased. Her shoulders relaxed. She had not realized how closely the manor held her until distance loosened its grip. At the boundary, a low stone wall marked where the land changed. Beyond it, the forest grew thicker, darker, less managed. Bluebeard stopped. "I don't cross this line," he said. Eloan studied the forest. "Why not?" Bluebeard's gaze lingered on the trees. "Because beyond it, things do not stay as they are meant to." Eloan stepped closer to the wall. "And here they do?" Bluebeard turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Here," he said carefully, "they stay as they are agreed to be." Eloan felt the weight of that word settle in her chest. Agreement, consent, structure. She realized then that Bluebeard did not rule his house through fear or force. He ruled it through alignment. Everything in the manor existed because it had agreed to remain in place. She returned to the house with a quiet resolve she did not yet name. That evening, alone in her room, Eloan placed the keys on the table once more. She examined them carefully now, not as objects of temptation, but as symbols. Each key represented access granted willingly. Each door opened because someone, somewhere, had decided it should. And the forbidden door existed not because it was dangerous, but because it was withheld. Eloan understood something then that made her breath catch. The door did not guard a secret. It guarded Bluebeard's authority. If she entered, she would not simply break a promise. She would break the structure that made the house function. And the house, with all its warmth and order and quiet persuasion, would not forgive that easily. Late that night, she heard footsteps outside her door. They paused, waited, then moved on. Bluebeard had not come to see her. He had come to confirm her presence. Eloan lay awake long after the house settled, staring at the ceiling. She imagined what it would feel like to leave, to walk beyond the boundary wall, into the unmanaged forest, into a world that did not offer comfort so readily. The thought was frightening. The thought was freeing. And somewhere in the depths of the manor, the door remained closed, not locked, not guarded, simply waiting for the moment when comfort would no longer be enough. Eloan closed her eyes, heart steady, mind sharp. She did not yet know what she would do. But she knew this. The house had begun to tighten. And tightening things, she had learned, always believed they were protecting something. Until the moment they broke. Chapter 5. What the key was meant to teach. The change came quietly. Not as a threat. Not as an argument. Not even as suspicion. It arrived as certainty. Eloan noticed it first in herself. She woke one morning and realized she could walk the manor blindfolded. She knew which floorboards sighed beneath weight, which corridors held warmth longer after the fires dimmed, which windows caught the sun just long enough to feel hopeful before winter reclaimed the light. The house no longer revealed itself to her. It repeated itself. And repetition, she understood, was how comfort became enclosure. Bluebeard grew more relaxed. He laughed more often now, softly, briefly, at moments that required no humor. He spoke of shared time as though it were already memory rather than possibility. "When you're settled," he said once, stirring his tea slowly, "you stop asking where things lead." Eloan watched the steam rise and disappear. "Deep?" she asked. Bluebeard smiled faintly. "I stopped long ago." The servants, too, changed. They lingered closer, anticipated her movements with greater precision. When she paused in a corridor, one would appear moments later with an excuse, a tray, a question, a reminder that something had been prepared for her elsewhere. The house had begun to watch back. Eloan did not speak of it. She understood now that observation was not the same as surveillance. This was gentler, more intimate, the kind of attention that claimed to care for you while ensuring you did not drift. At night, the dreams returned, but the door no longer waited at the end of the corridor. In the dreams, it stood open. Light spilled outward, soft and golden, the kind that promised relief rather than revelation. Eloan never saw what lay beyond. She only felt the pressure to step inside, not urgency, not fear, but the calm insistence of something that believed it already owned her compliance. She woke each time with the same thought resting fully formed in her mind. This is what the house expects. On the 10th night, she made her decision. Not suddenly, not emotionally. She made it the way one solves a quiet problem that has been waiting patiently for attention. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown that blended into the shadows of the corridors. She gathered nothing. No cloak, no bag, no symbol of escape. This was not departure. It was examination. The manor was silent as she stepped into the hall. No servant stirred. No doors opened in anticipation. The house seemed to hold its breath, not in alarm, but in confidence. Eloan walked until she reached the corridor. The one that narrowed without reason. The one the house treated differently. She stopped before the door. Up close, it looked even more ordinary than she remembered. No markings. No ornamentation. No warning. The wood was smooth beneath her palm, warm from the steady heat carried through the walls. She did not touch the handle. Instead, she reached into her pocket and removed the ring of keys. They lay heavy in her hand. She studied them now not as symbols of access, but as instruments of permission. Each one represented a door that agreed to open. And this door required something else. Elowen selected a key at random. She slid it into the lock. It turned easily. The door opened without resistance. No creak. No rush of cold air. No drama. Only darkness beyond the threshold, deep, calm, waiting. Elowen stepped inside. The room was not what stories promised. There were no horrors, no blood, no evidence of violence or cruelty, no proof of monstrous acts hidden away from the light. The room was empty. Stone walls, a single chair, shelves lined with ledgers, journals, stacks of neatly arranged papers, a table at the center, clear except for a single object, a book. Elowen approached slowly. The air in the room felt different, not heavy, but unfiltered. The silence here was not arranged. It did not soften itself. It did not wait to be interpreted. It simply existed. She opened the book. It was not a record of crimes. It was a record of women. Names, dates, observations. Not cruel, not mocking, clinical, quiet, compliant, curious but restrained, resistant at first, then grateful. Each entry ended the same way. Elowen's breath caught. She understood now. The room was not a secret. It was a measure. This was where Bluebeard kept proof, not of violence, but of success. Evidence that his structure worked. That comfort, carefully applied, could reshape desire. That boundaries framed as respect could become cages without bars. The room existed not to punish disobedience. It existed to reassure him. Elowen closed the book. Behind her, the door remained open. She did not rush. She did not panic. She sat in the chair and let the understanding settle fully into her body. Bluebeard did not want obedience. He wanted agreement, not forced, not demanded, chosen. She rose, left the book untouched, and stepped back into the corridor. The house reacted immediately, not with anger, with disturbance. Lights flickered faintly. The air shifted. Footsteps echoed where none had before. Somewhere deeper in the manor, a door opened and closed. Elowen walked calmly toward her room. Bluebeard was waiting. He stood in the corridor near the stair, his posture rigid in a way she had never seen before. His composure had not shattered, but it had cracked. "You went in," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Elowen replied. Silence stretched. Not heavy, final. Bluebeard's gaze searched her face, not for fear, not for guilt, but for something else. Confirmation. "And?" he asked quietly. Elowen met his eyes without hesitation. "It was exactly what I expected." His jaw tightened. "Then you understand." "Yes," she said. "I do." He waited. Elowen did not offer apology. She did not justify herself. She said only what mattered. "You don't lock the door," she said calmly, "because the lock isn't the point." Bluebeard's breath left him slowly. "The house gives everything," she continued, "so that leaving feels unreasonable, so that staying feels like gratitude instead of surrender." Silence again. This time, it belonged to Elowen. "And now?" Bluebeard asked. Elowen felt the weight of the manor around her, the warmth, the care, the perfect quiet that had been tightening without her noticing. "Now," she said softly, "I decide whether I stay knowing what staying costs." Bluebeard did not move. For the first time, he looked uncertain. And Elowen realized the truth the room had been built to conceal. Bluebeard was not afraid of curiosity. He was afraid of a woman who understood the terms, and still chose for herself. She turned and walked past him. The house shuddered just slightly, and for the first time since she had arrived, Eloan felt something open instead of close. The choice had been made. All that remained was to see what the house would do when comfort was no longer enough. Chapter 6. The House That Could Not Follow. Eloan did not leave immediately. That surprised Bluebeard more than her entering the room ever had. She returned to her chamber and closed the door with deliberate calm. She sat at the small table and lit a single candle, not because she needed light, but because the act felt grounding, an assertion of presence rather than permission. The house responded the way it always had. Quietly. Warmth pressed gently from the walls. The faint scent of wax and cedar lingered in the air. Somewhere far below, a servant moved, careful not to intrude. Everything continued as if nothing irreversible had happened. That was when Eloan understood the house's final trick. It did not punish deviation. It absorbed it. It waited for discomfort to fade, for resolve to soften, for the rhythm of comfort to reclaim what certainty briefly loosened. The house did not chase those who strayed. It trusted patience more than force. Bluebeard trusted it too. Hours passed. Eloan lay on the bed, eyes open, listening to the subtle life of the manor, the settling stone, the breath-like hush between sounds. She imagined how easily she could stay. How simple it would be to let the knowledge she had gained become another quiet thing she carried but never acted upon. That, she realized, was the final cost. Staying would not require her silence, only her acceptance. When dawn came, pale and thin through the frost-laced window, Eloan rose. She dressed slowly, choosing warmth over elegance. She gathered no possessions beyond what she had arrived with. No book, no keepsake, no proof. The house did not protest. It never had. She stepped into the corridor and walked without hesitation toward the outer doors. Servants paused, startled, watching her pass with expressions that hovered between concern and relief. None spoke. None blocked her way. They had seen this before. Not often, but enough. At the base of the stairs, Bluebeard waited. He had not slept. The careful composure he wore like a second skin had thinned. His posture remained upright, but his stillness was different now, less assured, more watchful. "You don't have to leave," he said quietly. Eloan stopped a few steps away. "I know," she replied. "The house will still give you everything," he continued. "You can remain without consequence." Eloan met his gaze steadily. "There is always consequence," she said. "You simply designed this place to delay its arrival." Bluebeard's jaw tightened. "You could have lived well here." "I did," Eloan said gently. "That's why I can't stay." He searched her face, not for fear, not for doubt, but for the smallest sign that she might be persuaded. When he found none, something old and tired flickered behind his eyes. "Do you think you're different from the others?" he asked. Eloan considered this carefully. "No," she said. "I think I listened sooner." Silence filled the space between them. Bluebeard stepped aside. The doors stood open behind him, winter light spilling across the stone floor. "You'll tell people," he said. It was not an accusation. It was an acknowledgement. Eloan shook her head. "They won't hear it," she replied. "Not the ones who want what you offer." She passed him then, her steps unhurried, her back straight. The cold air struck her face as she crossed the threshold, sharp and bracing and honest. Frost bit through the soles of her shoes. Wind tangled her hair. The world outside the manor was rougher, louder, less considerate. It was also wide. Behind her, the house remained exactly as it had been, stately, warm, immaculate. Its doors did not slam. Its windows did not darken. It did not react, because it did not know how. Eloan walked until the path turned to earth, then stone, then nothing at all. She did not look back. Behind her, Bluebeard stood alone in the doorway for a long time. The house waited for him to return inside. He did. Days passed. Then weeks. The manor resumed its rhythms. Fires burned. Meals were prepared. The corridors remained quiet and orderly. Bluebeard returned to his routines, reading, walking, managing, existing within the structure he had perfected. But something had shifted. The house felt larger now. Not in space, but in emptiness. The forbidden room remained open. Not because Bluebeard left it that way deliberately, but because closing it again felt meaningless. The room had served its purpose, and the certainty it once provided no longer soothed him. He began to notice how often he stood listening, not for footsteps, not for voices, but for something else. Absence. The house could give everything, but it could not give him back the illusion that comfort was enough. Far beyond the hills, Eloin reached a small village near the forest's edge. She stayed there for a time, working when she could, listening more than she spoke. She did not tell her story as a warning. She told it as a question. Some listened. Some did not. Years later, travelers would still speak of Bluebeard's house. Some would visit. Some would stay. Some would leave early, unsettled by a comfort that felt too precise. And sometimes, when winter settled heavily and the world grew quiet enough to hear its own breath, someone would stand before an open door and feel a choice form clearly in their chest. Not fear, not temptation, understanding that the most dangerous rooms were not locked. They were offered, and the bravest thing a person could do was not to resist force, but to walk away from a comfort that asked them to become smaller in exchange for peace. Eloin never returned to the manor. She did not need to. The house had taught her everything it was capable of teaching, and she carried that knowledge forward into a life that remained imperfect, unpredictable, and unmistakably her own. The house remained, still beautiful, still warm, still waiting, but it would never again mistake silence for consent, and it would never again confuse a woman's presence with her permission to stay.